From Transport Topics in Washington, D.C., this is RoadSigns. And now here's your host, Michael Fries.
Thank you for listening to RoadSigns, the podcast series from Transport Topics that explores the trends and technologies that are shaping the future of trucking. In this episode, we'll set out to answer the following question. How are state governments handling regulatory issues so far in 2021? As we wait for action from the current administration and Congress on national infrastructure, there have been plenty of action on the state level. 2021 has been filled with plenty of state legislation concerning the trucking industry. Fortunately, we have our Transport Topics government team to provide us a bit of detail. We'll take a closer look at state action with reporter Eleanor Lamb, but first, let's talk tort reform with reporter Eric Miller. Welcome to the show, Eric.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Glad to have you on. One of the things that I wanted to talk about with you, and through your reporting, of course, is stage accidents. In your reporting, you have talked about lawsuit abuse legislation and what the states and trucking organizations are doing. But before we kind of get into all of that, can you just explain to us the whole process of stage accidents and what these perpetrators are doing and what the goal is for them?
Sure. This has been going on for some time, and for some reason, I haven't been able to figure out why it's centered in Louisiana. I guess some of the courts there make these lawsuits easy to process. Basically, what's been happening is people who have plans to sideswipe big trucks, tractor trailers, they lie in wait for the truck to come by. They sideswipe it, and then somebody will run down the truck and say, "Hey, you just hit this car. You should come back and deal with this. You were at fault." And so what happens is the whole idea of these people, they'll have maybe 3-4 people in the car. All of them will claim that they're injured from this accident. What they'll do is they work with an attorney, and the attorney will file lawsuits against the trucking companies for slamming into them when actually the trucker was not at fault. And what's odd about this whole process is that there's been a lot of settlements on these cases, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and there have been more than 100 of these accidents since about 2015 or so. And we had a recent development last week where 5 more individuals had pleaded guilty to staging 2 accidents. And this brings the number of people either under indictment or pleading to 38 individuals. So it's been something that's been going on for quite a long time, and been an ongoing investigation by the FBI, the Louisiana State Police, and the New Orleans Crime Commission. And in fact, the legislature just recently in Louisiana made it also a state law to process these things as crimes in the state. So you have a double whammy. Both the feds and the state people can file indictments on people who are doing this.
One of the things you were just explaining, just kind of the how and why of all of this and what's being done about it. I guess we're going to talk about what's going to be done about it, but through your reporting, of course, there have been a lot of actions by state lawmakers, specifically in Texas, that you've recently written about. What are some of the things that they're doing to curb this activity and to punish these perpetrators?
Yeah, Texas is a pretty interesting place. They had quite a few wins in their state. In the laws they've been trying to pass through their state legislature. And this is the result of an 18-month campaign so far by American trucking associations to get their state trucking associations involved in gaining laws, getting them passed that will help mitigate some of these huge lawsuits that have been resulting from plaintiffs' attorneys who are very skillful at getting juries angry and issuing large jury verdicts. This kind of follows a study back in last year in the summer where the American Transportation Research Institute did an analysis. And what they found was that in the past 5 years, there were nearly 300 court cases that resulted in jury verdicts over $1 million against truckers in accidents. Many times the truckers are at fault in these accidents, but these jury verdicts are really outlandish and have been causing huge problems. They also can result in getting your insurance rates hiked. Once you get into an accident and have a big jury verdict against you, your insurance will go up in large measures, actually. So this has been going on probably for 10 years. And kind of at the heart of this is a theory that plaintiffs' attorneys use against trucking companies. It's called the reptile theory. And basically, what they do is when they sue a trucking company for an accident, what they don't just talk about what happened in the accident. They actually investigate the trucking company for things like their policies on safety, how they train their drivers, and when they use this, they try to portray truckers as bad people who don't care about safety. Their aim is to get juries to fear for their own lives and to say, "Wow, we don't want a bad operator like this on the road." When actually a company may be pretty safe, and I think most truckers are safe, pretty much a priority in the trucking industry. But they skillfully get juries angry and they'll issue large verdicts to punish trucking companies, to punish the whole industry. So it's a pretty big problem in the industry, and it's caused insurance rates to go up huge. So what's happened is ATA is trying to get their state trucking associations to work within legislatures to get legislation that would mitigate some of these problems they have, some of the ground rules and trials and such.
From time to time, an issue commands so much of the industry's attention that it requires a deeper dive, a resource readers can turn to, a Transport Topics special report. We're turning our attention to another big issue, electrification and the key factors that will drive this industry trend. In every case, we're working to provide our readers with information, analysis, and clarity on key issues confronting fleets. One comprehensive resource packed with insights that can give you the edge. Transport Topics invites you to learn more about our special reports. To reserve your copy of the latest special report, visit ttn.ws/electrification.
Nuclear verdicts are a big problem, as you just stated. ATRI, with the concern survey that they had just released, I believe in October, tort reform and these lawsuit abuses are one of the top concerns with those in the trucking industry. And as you had mentioned too, with ATA, Chris Spear has been very outspoken about these nuclear verdicts and these litigators who are taking advantage of these laws and just kind of the boundaries that they are allowed to perform in. So, and you had mentioned that ATA, along with other state organizations, have been lobbying state lawmakers to correct this particular problem. And in your reporting, you explained some of the things that are being done about that. Can you elaborate that on a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, Texas Trucking Association is a good example of being pretty effective in their lobbying. And it's not easy. John Esparza, who's the president of the Texas Trucking Association, said getting bills passed is a pretty complex endeavor. Number one, you have to have good timing. Sometimes issues consume a legislature. They only meet maybe for 2, 3, 4 months every year. Some of them meet every 2 years. So your window is actually limited. But he likened trying to get legislation done to a giant game of chess played on the ceiling. He said he's even lost legislation on things that were simple just because they may have run into timing problems. The legislature has to get done and go home. Um, but it's been going on for maybe 18 months that ATA has been waging this war. And in Texas, they've done some really interesting things. Anything from as simple as there's often in many states there is laws that don't allow, say, a trucking company to introduce into evidence the fact that the guy in the car who got injured wasn't wearing his seatbelt. In Texas, they got a law just passed recently that would allow these things into evidence. Then, and also, there's been restrictions on, say, getting videos into evidence. Many trucking companies have videos on their trucks just for this purpose, to monitor their drivers and to see what happens when there's an accident. They just are now allowed to introduce into evidence a video that may show, say, we got this, it wasn't our fault. This person that testified may have said he was a witness and saw it happen, but here's a video that proves that it's not our fault. And in Texas, they also got a bill passed. This was all in one bill. It was called House Bill 19. Interestingly enough, it passed 100-0 in the House, in the Texas House, and 31-0 in the Texas Senate. They set up a law. In this law, it had a provision that would allow truckers to bifurcate a trial, to divide it in two. And the first phase would be to determine who is at fault. And then the second phase would have discussions and evidence regarding how much of a penalty should be assessed by a jury, say, against a trucking company. And it has a potential to really reduce the size of some of these verdicts. So they've been really busy in Texas, and they've had some incredible successes, perhaps leading the pack of among maybe 8 or 10 trucking associations who have been working hard to get bills passed. Some successful, some not.
You had mentioned the seatbelt law, which I think it was referred to as the seatbelt gag rule. The phrase that I'm hearing just in reading about this is just the common sense. And for someone looking outside into this problem, you would think that it would be a slam dunk to get this legislation passed, since you would think something such as simple as a seatbelt rule would be handled very easily. And I mean, you were just explaining with the sausage being made, and the progress is moving. Albeit slowly, but there's still progress being made. And it being the summer right now, and the state houses, most of the sessions around the country are wrapping up. Where do you see this heading? I mean, is this the path of correcting a simple problem in the complex arena of tort reform, or will there be some other hurdles to cross to really get this problem of lawsuit abuse handled?
Yeah, well, American Trucking Associations and Chris Spear have said that this is going to be a marathon, not a race, not a sprint. And one of the problems you face in any state legislature, in Congress also, is the fact that many legislators are also attorneys. They probably comprise the majority of many legislatures. And, they have connections with the Trial Lawyers Association. And so they will listen to the trial lawyers sometimes, and depending on the issue. But so you have to convince lawyers in the legislature that these laws are just and won't really disallow a person who is injured, say, in an accident, to seek damages. They want to be fair. Some of them have buddies, and you always see the trial lawyers in each state. Well, they'll work hard against passage of these kind of bills. And in Texas, they didn't like this bill, but they did do some amendments that would make it a little less difficult for plaintiffs' attorneys. But this is an ongoing fight, and ATA has decided this is one that has to be waged in the states, because a lot of these things are state laws. There are no federal laws. They differ in each state. And Chris Spear has also pointed out that right now in Congress, you have a Democratic president, a Democratic House, and that Republicans who would generally tend to side more with trucking companies in a lot of these disputes. It's going to be difficult to get it through Congress. Plus, you have a very strong Washington, D.C. lawyers group that Spear called an 800-pound gorilla that would be really tough to fight in D.C. because they've got lots of connections. They've been around for a long time, and they'll fight anything resembling the types of issues that ATA is pursuing.
With that analogy of the 800-pound gorilla, it's more like an 800-pound gorilla sitting on the chest of lawmakers, and getting the problem solved is going to be a long haul, for sure. Eric, I just want to thank you for making us smarter. Thanks for being on.
Thanks. It was my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
In times like these, it's crucial to stay informed. Transport Topics is offering all the information you need to make business decisions in these unprecedented times. And in the wake of the many event cancellations and group gatherings, TT ensures a virtual way to consume business content and conversation. To join the conversation and stay ahead of the news, follow Transport Topics on all social outlets or by visiting ttn.ws/stay informed.
Welcome back to Road Signs. I'm your co-host, Michael Fries. Did you know when I'm not hosting Road Signs, I'm actually in charge of writing the Transport Topics Equipment and Maintenance Update? Soon, the Transport Topics Equipment and Maintenance Update, or EMU as we like to call it, will be going through some changes, and we want to invite input from listeners like you. And while the knowledge and expertise will stay the same, we want to pull it from the pages of the weekly edition and make it a standalone resource for fleet maintenance experts like you. So we're wondering, how can we build the best resource for you? To share your insight, complete the survey at ttn.ws/equipment01. That's ttn.ws/equipment01. We just spoke with Transport Topics reporter Eric Miller about lawsuit abuse and the state legislation to curb it. Now let's learn more about the regulatory action that's going on around the country with Transport Topics reporter Eleanor Lamb. Welcome back to Road Signs, Eleanor.
Good to be with you, Michael.
One of the things earlier in the program that I spoke to Eric Miller about was the seatbelt gag rule. And we kind of touched upon that slightly in our conversation, but through your reporting, you had written about the work of the West Virginia State House legislation and what they were doing about that particular rule. Could you elaborate more on that?
Sure, yeah, this issue has come up in West Virginia. Not too long ago, in early April, the West Virginia legislature passed a bill to allow the use or non-use of seatbelts as admissible evidence in civil actions. And this is a legislative step that the trucking industry has applauded. Now, specifically, this legislation establishes the admissibility of evidence related to seatbelt use with regard to a claimant's damages. And as I mentioned, Mike, this is a step that the trucking industry has praised in the ongoing effort to curb lawsuit abuse. As you know, American Trucking Association's president Chris Spear has identified reforming the industry's litigation environment as a top goal. During his time, especially over the last year and a half or so, I'd say. So this seatbelt gag rule legislation was a positive step on that front.
Well, it seems that the seatbelt gag rule seems to be not so much a heavy lift for state legislatures. What are some of the other things that states are doing? I know West Virginia and a lot of other states are working hard to combat tort reform. What are some of the things that the other states are doing in your reporting?
Yeah, that's true, Mike. Some states have passed legislation that the trucking industry has praised on this front. One example, pretty recently in May, Montana Governor Greg Gianforte signed a bill revising civil liability laws related to damages in lawsuits. So specifically, this legislation deals with inflated bill amounts, which are known as phantom damages. And similar to that West Virginia gag rule bill, the American Trucking Associations praised this legislative action as part of the ongoing effort to curb lawsuit abuse. In this, basically it's a bill noting that every person who suffers detriment from the unlawful act or omission of another may recover from the person at fault a compensation in money, which is known as damages. And this bill basically outlines the measure of the damages recoverable from the person at fault for the reasonable value of medical services or treatment in legal actions arising from bodily injury or death. So the goal here is to get away from that, those inflated bills, inflated medical bills. And that, like I said, those are known as phantom damages. This was a big issue for the trucking industry.
As you were mentioning, Eleanor, along with Eric, tort reform is a big issue, along with many other issues. And having the pandemic on top of all these pressing issues, this has been a pretty much a complicated year, 2020 and even 2021 in that regard. The last time we spoke, we were talking about state revenue and how that was kind of taking a hit during the pandemic since there wasn't really passenger traffic since no one was traveling, everyone was staying at home. But now it's 2021, we're having restrictions lifted, and the state DOTs are happy about things turning the corner. Can you elaborate more on that through your reporting?
Sure, yeah. When we chatted last time, I discussed a story that I had written about what the effect of the pandemic had been on state transportation revenue. And as you know, state transportation revenue depends on primarily gas tax and diesel tax revenue. And this, makes a lot of sense when you think about it. But in April 2020, when we saw the most dismal lows in traffic levels, when everyone was staying home, everything was shut down, gas tax revenue plummeted because people weren't filling up the pump, people weren't driving, and that had a negative effect on state DOT revenue. And at the same time, last April 2020, trucking had remained pretty much steady. It dipped a teensy bit, but it recovered pretty quickly, and it had pretty much held steady because truckers, unlike a lot of people, unlike you or me, did not have the luxury of staying home. So, as part of a, shall we say, a 1 year out type of story, approximately 1 year after I wrote that story, I checked in again. I reached out to the state DOTs that I talked with the first go around, and I basically said, "How's it going? How are your traffic levels doing? And how's your revenue doing?" And the trend that those states revealed to me was that recovery is on a slow but positive trajectory. People are no longer completely shut down. They are hitting the roads again. Passenger vehicle traffic is still down in a lot of states, it's still down across the board, but it was not nearly the lows that it was. At its worst, it dropped between 40 and 55% in some states. Now, on average, it's down anywhere between 5, 8, and 12%. That's passenger vehicle traffic. Truck traffic, similar to that what was the story last spring, has remained pretty steady. Truckers are still providing stability in terms of pumping diesel tax revenue into state coffers and offering a little bit of stability in terms of the revenue. So that has been the story thus far, looking at it from a year out. And like I said, things are moving slowly, but they're in a positive direction. And this story was published March 2021. It is now June 2021, and I think that has even hastened more since then. I think even more people are out there on the roads. So states definitely took a hit financially. States have a lot of recovery to do, but I believe in terms of COVID-19 traffic dips, I believe the worst is long behind us.
Well, let's keep the good news going. As you were saying, as things are getting better, people are getting vaccinated, restrictions are getting lifted. There's been some work from our neighbors up north. North Dakotians and Canadians have been collaborating together for vaccination help. Could you speak more upon that?
Sure. Yeah, this was an initiative that was announced in late April. Leaders from North Dakota and two Canadian provinces reached agreements to offer COVID-19 vaccinations to Canada based truckers who cross the border to deliver goods. Now, it's no surprise that with our massive shared border with Canada, there are some truck drivers whose day to day operations are basically just crossing the border. Sometimes 3 or 4 times a day, all they do is go from Canada to the US and back again. That is their runs. And these programs made between North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum and then the leaders of the Canadian province of Manitoba and the province of Saskatchewan have signed agreements to vaccinate essential workers who are transporting goods across the borders. And what really came down to is that North Dakota found that they had enough. They had enough vaccines, and they not only did they have enough, but they had some extra. And in Canada, the vaccination cycle is a little bit behind the US. So people in Canada, especially those essential workers who travel across the border, needed to be vaccinated. So what they did was they set up a North Dakota Department of Transportation rest area as a vaccination site. And truckers who regularly go from Canada to North Dakota as part of their normal routes were able to set up appointments and get vaccinated at these sites. It was a good exercise in goodwill, and again, it was helping out because the Canadian provinces were lacking in the vaccines, and North Dakota had more than it needed.
Well, it's nice to at least end this conversation on the helpful nature of our governments and Canadian government and just government officials in general, since we're kind of lacking in that cooperation of politicians per se. Eleanor, it was a pleasure having you on, and thanks for making us smarter.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Did you know you can ask Alexa to open Transport Topics? In just 1 minute, you will hear the biggest trucking headlines of that day. Be prepared and start your morning off right with Transport Topics.
Before we close, let's take a moment to revisit our original question. How are state governments handling regulatory issues so far in 2021? Although the spotlight is shining the brightest on national infrastructure, there's quite a bit of action on the state level. State houses, as well as industry associations, have been working to find solutions to the long-standing problems that have plagued the trucking space. One in particular, tort reform, has been a laggard issue for truck companies that have been entangled in staged accidents which place strain on legal and insurance costs. States have taken action to curb such heavy litigation, but as Eric and Eleanor pointed out, this is just a small piece of the puzzle. And speaking of state governments, tax revenue for their departments of transportation seem to be turning the corner. Although state coffers are still recovering from their down levels during the coronavirus pandemic, the DOTs are seeing an increase in passenger traffic, which is expected to grow as restrictions are lifted. There's surely progress, but still, all eyes are on Washington and for the impending infrastructure fireworks. Stay tuned. If you enjoyed this episode of Road Signs, please let others know. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If my questions have sparked questions of your own, share them with the Road Signs team, or reach me on Twitter at Michael V. Freeze. You can email us at share@ttnews.com. We'll read them and respond daily. And of course, we'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode of Road Signs. Until then, I'm Michael Freeze. Thank you for listening.